You're listening to the Females in Finance Meet the Author Show with host, male ally and author, Tony Stewart. On Meet the Author, Tony will interview diverse authors so you can discover new financial and leadership strategies for women and male allies in the financial services community. This episode is proudly presented by Paperwork. Be prepared for life.
Welcome to the Females in Finance Meet the Author series sponsored by Paperwork. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. I'm pleased to be joined today by Heather Ettinger. Heather is an author, speaker, CEO, and founder of Luma Wealth Advisors. For conceiving new ideas and tools that have propelled the financial industry forward, Heather was recognized at Icons and Innovators by Investment News and proudly accepted the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Award from the Women's Vote Project for advancing the aspirations of women in 2019. In this episode, we'll be discussing Heather's book, Lumination, Shining a Light on a Woman's Journey to Financial Wellness. Heather, welcome to Females in Finance Meet the Author.
Tony, thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I am as well. So let's dive on in. This is where I always start is, can you tell us about your origin story? How did you get started in financial services?
So I literally grew up in the industry because my dad had started a business in financial services when I was 2 years old. But I went through an internship and had a fortunate opportunity also to work overseas as an intern, both in London and in Geneva. But when I came back, when I graduated from college, then I decided that I wanted to pick a major financial city where my father had no connections, where I could also play ice hockey, which was one of my quirks. I'm an ice hockey player and played in college. And so I chose Boston. And the reason for picking a city where my dad didn't have connections is he already had a pretty strong presence and he was very influential in my life. And I really felt an important need to go develop my own reputation in financial services. So did that working for Jeffries and Company in Boston, had a phenomenal experience and fortunately a fair amount of success. And then I had headhunters after me. And ironically, once I could kind of write my ticket wherever I wanted to go, I decided to come back to Cleveland and join his business. So I did that in the late 1980s. And the focus on women came from the fact that I was working with other family members. And I also was working in the community with women philanthropists. And I quickly saw how poorly they were treated by the financial services industry, and also how important it was to provide them not just an advisory relationship, but also financial literacy. So that really began my path of a special focus on women dating back clearly to over 3 decades ago. So kind of came by it naturally and then really evolved into seeing a big need in the women's space.
That's great. So, speaking of that do you feel that there's been much improvement since the 1980s?
Sadly, no. We still are pretty backward in this industry. And so if we look both, I'm not sure I have all the data for the 1980s, but I can tell you we haven't increased the number of female advisors in the industry really in 20 years. It's still hovering in the high teens. And in addition, there is a big gap in serving the needs of women. And we continue in this industry to kind of use a lot of jargon, talk a lot about winners and losers. I often say CNBC looks a lot like ESPN, and that doesn't really resonate with women. So I think where we're going to evolve to over time is really an experience where she is measuring performance based on how her advisor is helping her reach more her life goals than necessarily versus the traditional benchmarks of how am I doing versus the S&P 500. And so clearly that's going to drive more advice-based relationships as opposed to just investment-driven relationships with women.
That's great. And I think overall, I have found in working with clients in the past is that when you're talking about those things anyway, is that you tend to have clients that are more satisfied with the choices they make. There's less churn. Do you feel that way as well?
Absolutely. So I think what we're seeing is that financial planning in its true sense, and I will say that unfortunately there are people in our industry who say they're planners and they're not, etc. But financial planning in its true sense is looking at your whole picture, right? So it's looking at what's your unique circumstance. And in the thought leadership work that I did that came out in 2011, hard to believe it's been 10 years, it of the over 500 women that we interviewed, 96% said, before you give me any advice, you need to demonstrate that you understand what is unique about me and my family. And I think that is what's so important is it's not just having that knowledge base to then help her with financial planning, help her and her family with financial planning, but it's also to provide that connection to her. She wants you to kind of repeat back what you heard, what's unique. And in that study, one of the things that we showed is, women are not a niche, that every single niche within women really requires something a little bit different. So how you might work with a widow may be very different than how you work with a female executive. And so that's what's really important, is understanding what's unique and then framing that. And the deliverables, the financial planning deliverables, which of course includes investment management and asset allocation, but it importantly includes tax planning, estate planning, insurance reviews, charitable gift planning, all those things, tailoring those around the experience that you're trying to provide for her and her family.
Well, that's great. And I think you hit on something really important is that, one, I know Arwen Becker always says that women are not a niche market. But that I think people often group all women together as, I guess, I can't quite think of the word right now, but as kind of a uniform body that every woman thinks the same, and that's not true. Every woman is different. And I mean, do you feel that there's more of a recognition that we're moving away from that women are not a niche market, or do you think that we're stuck there?
I think we're starting to move away from it. When I wrote the first study 10 years ago, I often said the industry changes the font to pink and thinks women are going to fall for that. And they're a lot smarter than that. I think we're starting to see some of the best leading firms doing much more work around niches. And just for the listeners out there, what I would say is if you are a financial advisor, just from our experience, I will tell you when we started focusing on niches within women, which would include widows, divorcees, inheritors, women breadwinners and executives, and women business owners, we doubled our growth rate. And further, Tony, we also doubled our profitability because you're starting to understand what is unique about that experience that you're delivering. And rather than just kind of throwing a bunch of stuff at them and hoping something sticks, right? So I think that's really, really important. And as I said, the lead advisors, the best advisors out there recognize this. And that's both women and men, by the way, too. There are a lot of great male advisors. I have a bunch on my team. But I do think what's very, very important is women want to learn a little bit differently too. They want to learn through the use of stories and anecdotes and relate to that. And also through you providing, usually at least two choices with kind of pros and cons. So it's not just investment recommendations. They're really, again, looking for that whole planning experience, but they're also learning through this kind of sharing of stories and anecdotes. So you should pick niches to work in that clearly you have some life experience in as well.
Well, that's great. And I think that's so important is finding connection and finding a bond with people. And that makes you a better advisor in my book is that, if you can relate to your clients and truly understand the challenges that they're trying to overcome, rather than just as the financial service industry does so often is like, this is a product, go buy it, like that old stock market, you have to sell 1 million shares of GE today to all your clients. And yeah,
Right,
those
right.
days are gone, but there's still a lot that remains of that element. Is like, we're going to force this down the consumer's throat rather than we're going to find out what people actually want.
Right.
And
And I think there are a lot of statistics out there that make it crystal clear that the way the financial services industry is still delivering is not resonating. So PIMCO did a great study in 2018, and basically some of the key statistics that came out of it were over half the women that were surveyed said the financial services industry doesn't reflect their lifestyle or services, so what they need. 78% said they would be much more interested in talking to a financial advisor if they focused on improving their quality of life versus just beating the market. So, and to give you an idea of the magnitude of that miss, so the majority of women actually would like to work with an advisor, and only about 20% do, because 80% leave meetings feeling misunderstood. And the other statistic that's kind of related to that is we see 70% of widows change advisors within the first year of their spouse's death, right? So these are all statistics that are saying, even though the women want advisors, they're not getting them. And why is that? Well, because, as you pointed out, they're talking product versus advice, and they want advice over product, or at least advice to be the wrapper, of course, to kind of frame the product. And they really want us to understand that the financial planning models default to men's salaries and career paths and family roles and those kinds of things, when the financial planning really should default to her role in the family as well, either as an equal player, or sometimes, of course, she may be the breadwinner in the family. That's the case in over 40% of families in the United States now. So I think that's important. And just to give you an idea, Oliver Wyman did a study a few years ago and said that this gap that I'm talking about is the $700 billion missed opportunity by the financial services industry. So this is not just a near miss. This is a big, big gap in the industry. And we are going to see both a lot of opportunity and also, I think, a lot of collaboration as we try to fill that gap and better serve women and their financial advisory needs.
well, that's great. And I hope we get there, because I think it serves us well as a society to be able to help everybody in our communities, and that will help the reputation of the financial services industry. It'll make us a stronger industry. It may change the nature of the products and services. So I think it's all for the good. But change is always slow, unfortunately.
Yes.
So let's get into your book, since it is Meet the Author. I love the title of your book, Lumination, Shining a Light on a Woman's Journey to Financial Wellness. How did you come up with the title?
So it clearly is a play on light, and with both Lumination and Shining a Light. And really, how I came up with the title was, I said, this is not rocket science, but because the industry is missing what women are looking for, what I'm trying to do in the book is say to women, it's okay to say what's going on in your life isn't working, whether it's because you don't have time, because you don't trust advisors, you haven't found anybody to trust yet, whatever it may be. It's okay to say, this isn't working for me. And I am presenting a different way, if you will, to dialogue about money and a different framework by which to have a relationship with money. So the title really came from the fact that when we shine a light, we all know if you shine a light on bugs, right, they all run out. So that's kind of the thinking of it is shine a light, chase things from the shadows, bring them into the light. And it's really, when I talk about financial wellness, which I'll define in just a second, it's about living that kind of more intentional life that brings you joy. So my definition of financial wellness is really almost like integrative medicine. It's about having a healthy relationship with money and your choices so that you can live that more intentional life that has the intersection of your relationships, your job or purpose, your health, your community, spirituality, and play, so that all those things come together for you. And that's really what we're setting the stage for in the book, is to say, what's happening isn't resonating. And based on the over 3 decades that I've been working with women, this is a process that really resonates with them. So that's where the title comes from, is, hey, it's time to shine a light on this. Women, it is the age of women. We have the majority of the purchasing power. We're going to inherit disproportionately. Now, 1 in 3 businesses in the United States are run by women. We're over 40% of the breadwinners. So this kind of tsunami of power is coming. And it's time to shine a light and say, it's okay to have a different process and a different dialogue with money around that process.
That's great. And you hit on something that I love to ask questions about, and that's the conversation and dialogue about money. Do you think that's a big part of some of the areas where we can improve financial education and financial literacy, is changing the money conversation?
Yes. So it's spot on, Tony. I would tell you that if you asked my why, my Simon Sinek why, it's that if we educate and empower women, they're the agents of social change. So that's where Heather's core is each and every day. So how do we go, or why does that conversation need to change? And it's because our industry treats money as the what. So when you're introduced to an advisor, usually the first couple questions are, where are your investments? Who's managing them? And all of a sudden, you're already into investments, which is one piece of the pie, not the whole pie. So in the book, I say, that's not the what. The what is those 6 areas that I just mentioned. That's the what. And then your why actually comes from your values and, truthfully, the relationship that you've had with money, the money messages you've received and all over the course of your life that has impacted your values and priorities. And the how, not the what, the how is your financial capital, and also, very importantly, your human capital, your time and your talent. How are you spending those that also help you live this more intentional life? So again, it's just reframing it to say, money is not the what. The what is these 6 areas of life. The how is, yes, money, but it's also your human capital. And the why, very importantly, is where we need to start and talk about our relationship to money and how that impacts our values and priorities.
Yeah, well, and that's so important because so many of us have different money issues that we've grown up with. One of the things that I hear quite often also is money shaming that also with women especially, that can be an issue. Do you feel that's a major issue, money shaming, especially with women?
I absolutely think there's money shaming. There's the age old, oh, women spend too much or they spend money frivolously or whatever. And truthfully, I don't find that to be true. And I've been doing this for over 30 years. I think sometimes men and women don't spend as intentionally as they might if they don't have full information. And perhaps, for me personally, the greatest example of that was 2008, 2009, when my children were kind of, early teens and younger. And we had, of course, the financial crisis, right? And my business is tied to the markets. And kids were well aware of that, obviously investments and all those things. And sitting down with our kids and saying, listen, we had a very open and candid discussion and said, here's the reality. Our priorities in this family are your education and time together. Those are two of the highest values that we have. We're not pulling you out of private school, and we're still going to take a family vacation. But this year instead, we're not flying to Florida, we're driving, and that saves us money on airfare and the rental car, all those things, right? And so you make it real to them, and then they understood why we then were cutting other things out of the budget as well. So I think that's what's important, is really having the information by which you can make decisions. And in true financial planning, of course, you do that because you get the data that says what's coming in and where am I spending it? And there are always some aha moments, no matter who we are. And I think where most women start is what I refer to in the book as the fear zone, the woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? And we all have that baggage. But women, because of the money messages we've received, are even worse. We walk in with a lot of shame. So one of the things that we often do is we create a connective exercise for them, and we share early money messages with each other. And then all of a sudden they realize in the room, they have by far more in common with everyone, no matter what their background is, no matter if it's the divorcee whose husband just, walked out, left her high and dry with debt, or whether it's the CEO of $1 billion plus company. Everybody's got their baggage. That's okay. It diffuses that anxiety, that fear, and then opens them up to learning and then being able to move forward. So I call it the fear zone, but it's that same place, that place of shame, and having to diffuse that so we can move forward.
Yeah, well, that's, that really resonates. And I think that makes a lot of sense, is that people need to start, when you're sitting down with a client, or if you're working for a financial services company, is that you have to understand that people are not coming from the places that we expect they're coming from, is that people are not driven by emotions, but that emotions play a role in the financial services and products that they choose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I might just mention that I apologize. I might just mention that we clearly, and this was pre-COVID, we have a financial stress crisis going on in this country. Finances are the largest source of stress, no matter what socioeconomic group you're in. And it just is not dealt with in this country. And that is something that has to change, because people are extremely stressed out. COVID has made it only worse. And it's to the tune of over 70% of Americans saying their largest source of stress is financial. So clearly, this is not just a woman's issue. I think the woman's issue is how the industry is delivering, but this is definitely a national issue.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm not surprised that it's 70%, but yeah, it is amazing. And we don't have financial education and so many other things, so people aren't able to deal with that stress because they don't have the tools and resources available to them, or know where to access those tools and resources.
Exactly.
Yeah. So To wrap up, what's your number one tip for women working in financial services?
My number one tip for women working in financial services is that really focus your efforts on a niche that resonates with your life experiences. So for example, if your mom is a widow and you've had to help her in that journey, right? Or family friend, or you've personally been a female executive and gone through a job transition or whatever. Pick a niche that you can personally relate to, you can personally tell stories. And there are a couple reasons for that. Number one is it gives you, when you speak from experience, it makes you sound smarter, better, whatever, because you really understand what they're going through. Number two is that you can then target where those people may be and how best to reach them. And then you also can target centers of influence that might be non-traditional that could send you referrals. So for example, that might be, if you're working with executives, employment attorneys, rather than we typically go to estate planners for referrals. So you might go to employment attorneys for referrals instead, because they're usually working with people going through some sort of transition with a job. So that's my number one recommendation. You'll come across more authentic, you'll come across more with more expertise and knowledge. And quite frankly, I would tell you, there's no doubt in my mind that you'll grow your business faster by doing that.
Definitely. And I would think that in working with people who you identify with, is that it's easier to work with them and you get more joy from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That over the course of my career, I look back and the highlights will never have market returns as being the best days of my job. Truthfully, the best days are where you're really connected to a client and you help them through some sort of process or challenge, and they come out on the other side healthier, better off, happier, and just in a better place. And those are the highlights of the work that we do.
That's great. That's great advice. You and I both have been in the business for a few years, and that is where you find the difference is when somebody has had an experience, and there's nothing more rewarding than a client saying, "Thank you for helping me solve this issue." I, and you're right. I can't think of a time where somebody said, "Boy, I'm really thrilled that this happened on my policy," or that it's like those are not the things that people talk about.
And they're pretty short-lived, truthfully, but you're right. It's the life experiences and being there through, those challenges, but also the high points, and celebrating at my firm, Luma Wealth. We use Learn, Connect, Celebrate as our tagline. The Learn is really focused on financial literacy, but also on getting to know the clients really, really well
Hmm.
and what makes them tick. And then the Connect is about connecting them to traditional resources, but also to other like-minded and like situation women, and also to non-traditional resources since they're managing the life of the family. And then the Celebrate, yes, it's awards and promotions, but it's also recognizing life events. Even anniversary dates of losing a loved one or whatever. How are we going to celebrate their life and their legacy even after they're gone? And I think that's where you can bring a lot of joy to your work over time as well.
That's fantastic. So, Heather, where can people learn more about you, and where can they pick up Lumination?
So Lumination can be picked up both at Amazon and also at Barnes & Noble, and quite possibly local bookstores are also picking it up as well, depending on where you live. To reach me, couple good ways. I'm at lumawealth.com, so www.lumawealth.com, and or Heather Ettinger at lumawealth.com. Happy to have people email me directly. On Twitter, I'm at Heather Insight, and of course, I'm also on LinkedIn at Heather Ettinger 14. So those are probably the best places to find me. And I'm all about being an advocate and champion for both women as clients, as you can tell, but also women as advisors. So feel free to reach out. Really believe in collaboration and connection to help move this industry forward.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate it. And to all of our listeners, we will be posting information in the show notes about how to get in touch with Heather. And of course, you're active in the Facebook group, so people can also find you there. So, make sure to just reach out to me. But I highly recommend Heather's book. It's great for the personal stories. It's also great for the research in there. So, Heather, thank you so much for joining us on Meet the Author.
Tony, it's just been a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Females in Finance and Cheryl as well. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this community.
Well, fantastic. This was a wonderful conversation. We really appreciate your time and your openness in sharing with the Females in Finance community.
Thank you so very much.
Great. And thank you everyone for joining us on Females in Finance Meet the Author series. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. Looking for more information about today's author or interested in joining the Females in Finance networking community? Be sure to subscribe at www.femalesinfinance.com.